Nothing wrong with a little hope when it comes to lots of things in life, but when we're thinking about our financial future, is wishful thinking doing more harm than good? Let's get into it this week here on the Wealthy Pilots Podcast with Scott Osborn.
We've got some turbulence up ahead.
Hey gang, what's going on? Welcome into the show once again as Scott and I talk investing, finance, and retirement. And Scott, a little wishful thinking never hurt anybody, right? But you got to be careful not to lean into that too much when it comes to your finances, right? There's a silly line from a movie. I don't know if you ever saw Deepwater Horizon or not, which is wild about the unfortunate events of the oil rig. But in there, they're talking about hand fishing, going catfishing. I don't know if you've ever tried it or not, but hillbilly hand fishing, where you stick your hand in the catfish hole. Noodling, exactly. Yeah. They call it hillbilly hand fishing where I'm at, right? They grab a hold of you, you pull him out. And it's like, well, hope is not a strategy. You have to expect to get bit. Basically, is the short context of the line in the movie. And so hope is not a strategy, right? So I think the same kind of conversation today we're going to have about wishful thinking is good, but make sure you got a strategy and not just kind of hopeful kind of thought process. How, you doing all right, my friend? You hanging in there this week?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to talk about this topic because, to me, we've all heard the old adage of, hope is not a plan. And right. I get that. I'm like the eternal optimist.
Okay. Nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, I mean, optimism is a great thing, especially, living in this country and just, I'm eternally optimistic on our economy and market. We're going to go through ups and downs for sure. We're going to have some rough days and quarters and years in front of us. But, I really do feel like this is a great place to be very optimistic for. And I think if you're going to be a goal-focused long-term investor, you need to have some optimism because if you're always looking if you're a pessimist, you're going to always be finding tons of news and reasons to sway you into a negative mindset. And that's going to be a terrible investing experience for you. Now, with that said, I do think from a hope standpoint or, having good hopes and plans for the future is one thing, but that's different than wishful thinking. And I do think wishful thinking can creep in, under the cloud of optimism and say, oh, everything will be fine. And there's a fine line between being an optimist and sticking our head in the sand too.
Yeah.
And just not acknowledging the reality of, some challenges that we're going to have to deal with over time.
Well, all right. So let's talk about a couple of traditional cliches in the financial and money world, especially from a taxation standpoint, right? Often we've been sold this thing. If you're if you're a certain age, especially around our age, you've been hearing forever that you'll be in a lower tax bracket when you get older and when you retire.
Yep.
And that kind of fallacy also runs with I'll have less money or I'll need less money. We'll talk about that in a second as well. But most advisors I talk to and professionals I talk to, Scott, are like, most of the time clients are not in a lower tax bracket. They're typically in the same tax bracket. But we've been bred to think about this fallacy that we'll just naturally be in a lower tax bracket when we get older. And it's typically not true.
Yeah, I think for most, most income earning people, that is an accurate statement. I do think for a lot of our airline pilots, there is a high likelihood they're going to be in a lower tax bracket because, especially if you're, a senior FO or a senior captain and you've gotten, to a certain income level, the odds of continuing that in retirement through your income sources are not super high, depending on what you have built out. However, I think it's not so much, well, where am I going to land in retirement, but also what are tax rates going to be when I'm in retirement.
Sure.
And so when we compare it to now, maybe let's say for easy math, a lot of them are right around that 32% bracket. But in retirement, it's very easy to start to paint a picture where tax rates could go up. We got a national debt that is, way out of line. $37 trillion and growing $1 trillion a month or something like that. But, we have a huge burden that we're going to have to pay with probably taxes down the road. We also know that tax rates are near historic lows right now. So is there a chance that taxes could go up? I think so. And I also think most folks we work with also believe that. And so when you start to stack it up and say, okay, well, tax rates could be a little higher, but then also what am I losing when I get into retirement? I'm losing, many of my deductions. I'm not contributing to 401ks anymore and those kind of things. And I'm losing a lot of my house is paid off. I'm losing those write-offs there. All the kids are out of the house. I'm losing those write-offs.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to look at, not just the W-2 income level and where does that put me on the marginal tax rates, but no, what is my actual tax rate? What is my effective tax rate in retirement? And you start to look at the income that you have coming in and the taxes going out, and it's really not that different in terms of percentages. And so that is something that you want to be conscious of and build a plan for. And that's a big reason we tell people, hey, you might not be in a lower effective tax rate in retirement. So we need to be diversifying our approach to where we're saving and investing. That's really one of the key parts I would take away from it is we don't want to just plow everything we got into this pre-tax bucket and just say, we'll figure it out later. Because I can tell you from working with many, many retirees, when later comes, and it always comes faster than we think it's going to come, it's like, this sucks trying to deal with it. And so we want to have some tax diversification too, where we can at least give ourselves some flexibility. And we can make sure that we have some opportunities to have non-taxable money or after-tax money that we can access in retirement to keep that, bracket management, tax bracket management, a little bit in our favor in retirement.
Yeah, and it'd be cool, like, when we get 65, we get Medicare. It'd be cool, like, if it was like, hey, you're 65, they automatically gift you a lower tax bracket. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen, right?
Nope.
And if you strategize and you plan for it, yeah, you could get there, but it's not just a given. So again, wishful thinking being the topic. Also the same with the market returns, right? So often you'll hear people say, well, it's done really well, so I keep getting these, I'll be fine, right? Well, okay, but that isn't that wishful thinking? Because we've gotten lulled into a 14, 15-year bull run with a few downturns here and there, but nothing prolonged really since the Great Recession.
Yeah, it's the returns have been, pretty great since we came out of the recession. Yeah, we had a bear market here this year in 2025, had another one in 2022, had a very, very quick one, but still had one in 2020 with the pandemic. And so, we've had three, 20+% downturns. But, to your point, a lot of them have been fast and furious and
very
come back. And so, ultimately it's easy. Again, this is, I think, can factor into our bias a little bit, especially if you're starting to project out a retirement plan. It's very easy to say, well, as long as I keep getting what I've been getting, I'll be fine. Right. And, statistically, we're just above average we're above average returns for an above average period of time. Mm-hmm. And so, just the law of averages would tell you that, well, we probably have a season of below average for a longer period of time coming our way. I don't know when that's going to be. But I think it is going to be because it's how the averages work. We just look back at the last 100 years of stock market data and it averages out to a certain portion and, roughly 9% for the S&P 500. We're above that the last decade plus. So there's probably going to be a time where, we get below average. It just is what it is. And that's going to test a lot of people's investment philosophies, because again, if I can just buy one, simple index fund and let it go, that's not bad when that index fund is doing really, really well. When it starts to underperform everything else for 3 or 5 years, we'll see if people are still that patient. Many people are not.
Well, leads to our next wishful thinking comment, which is, well, if it all goes to in a handbasket, I'll just keep working, right?
Yeah, and I think this is, this is one a lot of our pilot clients are very in tune to because, right now they have a mandatory retirement date of 65. And so, could they leave the airlines at 65 and go, do some sort of private aviation at 66
charter
plus?
Something.
Yeah, they probably could, but, many of them are not going to want to go work harder for a lot less money at that stage in their careers. And so, there's, the mandatory retirement date of something that they got to work through, but then also there's just the health issues or the potential for not being able to keep your medical at that age. And so there's definitely risk. And we talked about this a little bit in our last episode, but there's definitely risk in just saying, I'll just keep working because we don't know what the future holds. To me, I think so much of what we work for, we develop ourselves for, to get the skills for our careers, whether it's what you and I do or what our pilot clients do. So much of that is so I can get some sense of independence in my life. Mm-hmm. And the last thing we want to do is at the very end of our careers be lacking that independence and having to work and go get some other job. And then ultimately, if you're not able to do that, you're going to have to take a job that you probably don't really want to be doing. And I feel like that is an opportunity missed, especially if you got time on your side. You should be able to build a good investment plan, good savings plan that's going to get work optional for you at that stage in your career. And that's what we want. We want you to work because you want to work. That's it. Not because you have to.
Yeah. And, it's funny how these wishful thinking items that we're talking about this week, they all really play together, right? We all find ourselves, well, if this happens, then this, and they kind of like, daisy chain together there a little bit. Lower cost of living comes up a lot. Well, because there's that old fallacy. Well, you're only going to need, 75% or whatever whenever you get to retirement of what you were making. Again, maybe, but oftentimes who wants to go backwards in their lifestyle? And obviously we've seen that the cost of things just keep going up. So clearly that's probably not going to factor into helping us it be a lower cost of living. So again, wishful thinking.
Yeah, I mean, the lower cost of living one is really interesting for a couple of reasons. One, just factoring in inflation. I mean, inflation is going to cause most of us in our retirement. Our cost of living is going to double within our retirement.
What is it? 10 years or something like that, or 12 years it doubles? Yeah.
Yep. So, I mean, I'm in my low 40s now, and so it'll, double about one more time between now and when I retire to or get to that retirement age. So it's the cost of living. That inflation part is, creating, an increase already. The other
that's
part
normal inflation too, by the way.
This is normal inflation.
Right.
And, but I think the logic would be, you look at me right now, we have 7 kids at home, all girls. And
again, you are a saint and a scholar, and someday children will sing songs
I did marry a
about you.
saint, the blessed Saint Andrea. That's for sure.
There you go.
And so, when I think of like, well, okay, I'm not going to have 7 kids at home. My cost is going to go down significantly.
Sure.
That's true. Other than where do those 7 girls go? And if they all have their 3 kids, that's 21 grandkids that we're buying Christmas presents for and traveling all over the United States to go visit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I can tell you from working with retirees for many years too, is I have never had one time somebody call me and say, hey, I need to take a pay cut because, we just are not enjoying this money.
Yeah, who wants to go backwards again, to my point,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lifestyle piece of like, we're used to this level of travel, and we're used to this level of going out to eat or whatever. But there's also just the bills change from we spent it on one thing to we spent it on another. Like, hey, when we were younger with all of our kids, I didn't have time to spend all this money on golf like I do when I'm retired. And so the line item is still there, but the name of it changes over time. But we typically don't see too many people have a significantly lower cost of living in retirement, which is ultimately where we really recommend people look at, hey, are you saving enough? Are you saving enough to facilitate the lifestyle you currently have in retirement? For many guys, saving in just the 401k is not enough. They got to have a plan to save outside of the 401k as well.
Hey everyone, real quick, if you haven't grabbed Scott's Financial Flight Control Toolkit yet, now is the time. This is packed with tons of helpful resources and tools like this, Scott's book, The Dichotomy of Wealth, which is a pilot's guide to maximizing wealth and cash flow in retirement. You also get access to some great guides like this one, Advice Matters, which breaks down 4 key ways a good financial advisor can help you boost your returns over time. And guides like this one on the pitfalls of emotions when it comes to investing, and this one on the HCM byline investment strategy, and more. So if you'd like your very own Financial Flight Control Toolkit, just click the link in today's show description, and Scott and the team will be happy to get one sent your way at absolutely no cost to you.
Yeah, a couple episodes ago, we did a "Am I Saving Too Much for Retirement" podcast. So if you want to go check that one out, that might be helpful along the way. And I'll give you one more, Scott, and then I'll just ask you to kind of, well, how do we combat some of this wishful thinking, right? So I'll give you one more. A lot of your client base and folks that are type A, which did a podcast on that as well. They kind of make their own spreadsheets. They kind of make their own whatchamacallits. Or even if you go looking at the little statement thing with the 401k that you get and it says, oh, this is how much money you can take out in retirement or whatever, blah, blah, blah. If that all goes caca, like, what are you doing? Especially the spreadsheet thing. There's some people that just are like, they live and die by their spreadsheet.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big spreadsheet guy. No problem with it whatsoever. But you have to understand the limitations of the spreadsheet, right? And so if I'm getting ready to retire and I just run my little compound interest and say, okay, here's my account balance, I'm just going to get my 7% per year and drag it across. And then I'm going to back out my distributions at X amount per year. And it looks like I got plenty of money. Mm-hmm. Well, that's fine. But the problem is we use a spreadsheet based off of averages, but what our money actually goes through are not averages, right? So
right.
If I go down 50% in value, then up 50% in value in my portfolio, I averaged 0% over 2 years, but I do not have the same amount of money I started with. That is the impact of volatility. And so ultimately, what will happen is when I plot it all out on a spreadsheet, I'm ignoring the ups and downs of the markets. And that's what, and we've talked about this many times on the show, but when we talk about sequence of returns risk, if we go into retirement with, a significantly down markets early in our retirement, we significantly increase the risk of running out of money in retirement. And so we have to have a plan for that. And that's ultimately where the spreadsheet is going to let you down, because there is some more detailed analysis that needs to be run, looking at portfolio standard deviation, looking at volatility, understanding the impacts of distributions, understanding the impacts of taxes. And that's where we kind of like factor all those things in with different market scenarios. And really for our folks that are 55 and over, that starts to get pretty vital that we get that plan built out and start to really have a good warm fuzzy for what the impact is going to be and what kind of risk we need to take in the portfolio. So for many of us, we can't sit in cash and live a zero volatility retirement because we need to grow the nest egg. We also maybe shouldn't be 100% in Apple stock because we can't afford some huge downturn either.
Yeah. And so tech in general, right? Because all tech is about the same. So.
Exactly. And so there's some sort of middle ground between those two things that we need to accept some volatility, but we need to also understand that we got to have enough money on the sidelines that we can survive those down markets without selling things at a loss. And so the spreadsheet, I think, can absolutely give you a false sense of security. Mm-hmm. And again, if you're not taking distributions, it doesn't really matter. Your average return over a certain period of time, that's fine, with the ups and downs. But when you start taking distributions out is where we introduce an element into this retirement plan that can really, significantly add a lot of risk to your plan. And so just counting on the spreadsheet and it's not reality. It's not what your assets and your income are actually going to do in retirement.
Well, when you're building out the flight plan for folks, right? I mean, these are things that you're taking into account. You're taking in the different scenarios, but obviously this is why we stress test. This is why we do risk analysis and so on and so forth to kind of, take into account some of the variables that can happen. Absolutely.
And there's all sorts of calculators out there that you can run, but I mean, the biggest part is getting that insight that, hey, based off of the risk I'm willing to take and the needs that the plan call for, this is how we start to structure the portfolio and the assets that we have and build the income plan. And so again, you're just not going to get the details you need out of a spreadsheet that's going to really get you that insight. If it is giving you the insight, it's probably a false sense of security for sure.
Well, you're talking income plan, investment plan, long-term care, social security maximization, insurance options. I mean, we tend to think sometimes that, it's just the growth stage of, growing money, put money in a 401k, blah, 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 and roll. Yeah. But the preservation stage that is retirement is a whole different animal. I imagine, maybe I'm wrong because I'm not a pilot, but I would imagine it's probably the difference in flying like a little small Cessna and flying a big old massive jet. There's probably a fairly big difference in doing those. The fundamentals might be the same, but there's probably a lot of nuance that's quite different. I don't know. If I'm wrong, tell me in the comments down below. I'd love to learn a little bit more about the difference in that. That'd be pretty cool. All right, I think that's going to wrap it up this week. So wishful thinking at the end of the day, Scott, right? Just be careful with it. Nothing wrong with hope, but just have a strategy and a good strategy behind you.
For sure.
Yeah. All right. Anything else before we go?
No, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. And we'll see y'all soon.
Yeah, don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, all that good stuff. You can find the links to all the stuff we need below if you want to get the toolkit, if you want to get some time on Scott's calendar. All that is in the show descriptions below. Just go to retireairlines.com, and we will see you next time here on the Wealthy Pilots Podcast with Scott Osborn.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.